From Fathead Studios in Speedway, Indiana, this is The Skinny. And guys, I'm Ken Stout, and welcome to The Skinny. We have a huge show coming your way today. One of the best journalists in our modern day racing era, if you will, has decided to join us. Just came over after having lunch. He has a lunch on Friday with some of the biggest names in the history of the game. But this guy named Robin Lee Miller has come in, courtesy of Rob Klepper, I might add, because he didn't return my message whenever I sent him on December 21st. But he will one day. Of course, Rico Elmore is with us. Rob Klepper is with us. And Robin Miller, thanks for making time, man.
Ken, it was not a slight. I'm not really good on computers yet. I'm 70 years old. I'm
well,
challenged.
it was a phone, but...
In his defense, he did tell me, he said, hey, when Friday rolls around, you got to remind me. You got to remind me. He says, I'm getting old. You got to remind me. So I made sure I remind him, and he sent back the emoji thumbs up, so I knew we were good.
But I didn't know we were coming to a $50 million studio. This is like, are you kidding me?
I love that.
Pretty sweet, huh?
Rico must have hit the lottery.
This is
and then spin it, right?
This is Amazon.
This is awesome. I mean, it's as nice a studio as I've ever seen.
It's beautiful stuff. So we've already had some really big name guests on The Skinny, and I thought since we didn't really do it on the first one, we kind of assume everybody knows who these guys are when we come in here, and I think our audience for the most part does. But since this is going out to Facebook and a lot of people that might not know, why not come up with a couple of your credentials along the way, as you worked for the Indianapolis Star for 33 years. And I love the part when you got your first job at the Speedway, you were a stooge. I don't know, has that changed at all? Are
No,
you still a stooge?
I'm actually dumber now than I was in 1968. Jim Hurtubise was my hero, and I would go to the sprint car and stock car races at the fairgrounds and the Raceway Park, and I heard that he liked beer, so I'd steal beer, and I'd give it to him in the hopes that he would maybe someday recognize my face and maybe my name some decade, and I'd give him beer. Well, I was standing outside the garage in 68, cutting school, and Herc walked in, and I said, hi, Herc, and he's like, hey, what are you doing? I said, he goes, you want to help me for a week? I mean, my life was just completed. Help you? Yeah. I mean, it was when it was 3 weeks of practice. So Pete Hurtubise and the crew hadn't come in yet, so it was me and another college kid and Jim, and that was the three of us. And my job was to run the pit board, help push the car, put tape over his goggles on his helmet, and don't touch any tools because I was such an idiot. And I got fired because I ruined the paint job. I taped his goggles onto his helmet once with a bunch of hair sticking out because I got nervous, and he pulled his goggles off and ripped his hair off. So I was free help and I got fired. And so I cut school, and he made the race. The last roadster to make the race was in 1968, and that was that year. It was Jim, and he made it on Monday, the extra day of qualifying. And I cut school, and I was over by the fence and cheering for him, and he gave me the big wave over to come over the fence and get a qualifying picture, but I got drugged back by the guards. I wasn't allowed. But then I became friends with him and uncovered him and wrote about him at the Star, and it all came full circle. But if you guys could have seen him in 1960 at Terre Haute in a sprint car, you'd just take your breath away. It was unbelievable. So that he's the one that hooked me.
And then you followed up with Chief Mechanic Bill Finley, who was he had some great words to say about you too and your mechanical abilities.
He told me once, he said, don't take this wrong, kid, but you're the dumbest human being I've ever seen around a race car. He gave me a piece of metal to cut once, and it was a bandsaw, and I was just getting ready to cut both my thumbs off when he turned it off, and he goes, what? Do you see what you're doing there? Oh, yeah, thanks, Bill. For not but, I mean, at the worst day of his life, I stooged on his crew, and I was the vent guy on pit stops. And he was so generous with his time, and, well, not just me, but you. It didn't matter who you were, Kenny. If you had a sprint car, a midget, or anything, he would help you. The guys would just walk in. And Finley built his own Indy car in his garage behind his house with his own two hands and made the Indy 500 in those cars.
Isn't that awesome?
Johnny Parsons, Bentley Warren, unbelievable. And he was just, he told me once, he goes, I'm not this nice to my kids. Why do I help you? I said, charity case.
Described him as without a mechanical bone in his body.
Yes. He said, you should never own a race car. You can barely start a car. You should never own your own race car.
Is it then when you decided that You wanted to drive a race car?
So then he goes to Andy Granatelli in 1972 and buys his first race car.
Right.
Listen to that advice.
After Finley's advice, Art Pollard helped me get a Formula Ford from Andy Granatelli. It was painted Dayglow orange, and I ran about 7 or 8 races before I tore it in half at Watkins Glen. But I ate lunch every day with Vukovic, Bentonhausen, Parsons, and all the USAC guys. And they said, look, if you want to learn how to drive a race car and you're really serious, get rid of that squat to pee racer and go get a sprint car or midget. So I bought a midget from Gary Bentonhausen. It was the car Merle made his comeback on after Merle lost his arm at Michigan in the IndyCar race. Although they didn't really lose his arm. It was in the middle of the groove. They found his arm, but they say he lost his arm.
It just was no longer
It was
attached.
just no longer on his body. So I'm running. I become the fourth Bentonhausen brother. So Gary gets to order me around and scream at me and everything. And I had a Bentonhausen midget, and it was a wonderful little car. And I had that for like 5 years. And then I bought Gary Stanton, sold me his very first midget. Stanton had great sprint cars, and he sold me his very first midget. And I drove him nuts. I'd call him every day. Hey, how's my car? He goes, if you call me one more time, you're not going to have a car because I'll stop working on it. What do you mean, how's it going? You'll get it when it's done. Oh, sorry. So I had a really good Stanton midget, and I drove that till I got about $100,000 in debt. And it was the greatest 8 years of my life because you learn so much about yourself and about racing. And in those days, the first time I went to Kokomo, I made the feature, and there were 13 guys out of 20 starters were in that year's Indy 500. So these guys I've been writing about in the Star, I'm suddenly on a racetrack with. And my whole goal was, geez, don't kill somebody, don't get in their way. This is how they make their living. So you just want them to respect you. So I was to quote Jim McGee, you were a half-ass driver. That's probably a good term. I had some good moments and some bad, but never trade a moment of what, that was just the greatest. The USAC, in those days in the 70s, it was, you just look back at the guys that were running midgets, it was amazing.
So you have a good run there in that midget as you were talking about, but your best race to date inside of the midget was the Hut 100.
Oh, yeah. Oh, by far.
Qualified 5th out of 93 cars. I mean, you said the guy said you were a half-ass driver. You must have been sitting on the right side of your ass that day.
I had been the first alternate the year before. I was 34th fastest out of 102 the year before. Well, you might as well be 84th fastest because you're going home. There was no semi, there was no hooligan, there was no heat races. So when I went out to qualify in 80, Willie Davis, bless his heart, was the USAC official sitting on my right front tire. And he goes, how's it going, Birdman? I go, you better fire up the ambulance and the wrecker cork because I ain't going to be first alternate. He goes, calm down, Birdman. I said, I'm as calm as I can be. I'm just telling you. Nobody had made the race in about 30 minutes because the cushion was gone. It was like this far from the fence. And Joe Saldana and Steve Chassie said, the only way you're going to make this thing is to run it wide open against the fence. You just got to do it. So I did. And I came down the straightaway and Sleepy Trip and the guy there, they were pretty happy for me. So I pulled in, and the first thing is Gary Bentonhausen came down and goes, spit in my hand. I go, what? He goes, drug test. Who was in that? Who was in that car? I said, that was me, schmuck. So then before the race started, so you got Pancho and you got all these badasses behind me, and so Pancho comes up and he says, what side do you want me to pass you on at the start? And I said, I don't care what. But I actually passed Johnny Parsons for third, like on about the 6th lap. And it was the very first race ESPN ever televised. And I remember Bob Jenkins and Larry Newber saying, geez, I don't know what's gotten into Robin Miller. He's never run this good before. What?
There it is right there.
That's such a beautiful car.
Look at that,
and
Ken.
I see it.
That was qualifying. And so I passed JP, and then he gave me the world's most horrendous slide job to get third place back because I knew it made him crazy. And then it finally blew up. But what you guys know, because you've been around racing your whole life, is there's something about you can't explain to people what dirt racing's like. But I keep telling Scott Dixon and Joseph Newgarden and Will Power and guys like this, man, you guys got to try a midget or sprint car on the dirt sometime because Connor Daly's done it, and now we're going to have James Davison and we're going to have Santino Ferrucci at the Chili Bowl. So they're all IndyCar guys going to try the dirt.
Santino was built to run a midget.
Yes.
I mean, perfect.
And he hot lapped a sprint car the other day.
Yeah, they both tested
at Canyon,
out west.
At Canyon.
At Canyon, yeah.
They ran did
Gene
a pretty
Giles'
nice
car.
job. Because you guys know, I mean,
And Davison has the right frame of mind.
yeah, he doesn't care.
No, he does not care.
But the guy that would have been the sprint car driver for the ages would have been Montoya. And I had him all set up with Kevin Thomas's sprint car school. And Ganassi found out and put the kibosh on it. Because Montoya would have been. He lived to be crossed up, but there was just something cool about I think when you get to race and you get to be how I lived with Larry Rice. He was my landlord, and that's all I did. I wrote about it 52 weeks a year in the Star, and I got to go racing 5 months a year in USAC, and nobody had it better than I did. I mean, it was everything I could have ever imagined.
So Larry Rice invites me to one of your lunches. It was at the Working Man's Pub, obviously a number of years ago. And I had the pleasure of working with Larry for a number of years before he passed. Just absolutely wonderful guy. But I remember him telling me on the way to this lunch, he said, "I'm going to go over here and go to lunch with Robin Miller." He said, "I've known him for a long, long time." He said, "You just got to remember, as soon as he says this is off the record, it's really not off the record because it'll be printed on the next day." He said he's pissed everybody off somewhere along the way by doing that same exact deal. But I'll never forget him. And he was dead serious. He's like, "I love this guy, but man, he has pissed me off sometimes."
Oh, I got him in trouble at Pocono when they ran the dirt cars with the Indy cars in '81, AJ's last win. And Larry was talking about he was going to run a dirt car against an Indy car, and he knew how insane it was. So I used a couple of his quotes, and he was all pissed off at me for a while. He got over it because my rent check was on time and it cleared. But I'll tell you what, there's a guy that was so underrated as a race driver. He was co-rookie of the year with Rick Mears in 1978.
Yep.
And USAC midget champ, and won sprint car races with a dirt car champ, won the Hoosier 100. He just the most humble, nicest guy you'd ever want to meet.
So soft-spoken, you wonder where the aggression came from in the race car.
Oh, he had a Vega, and we used to drive. We'd be driving down the interstate. He'd be going 53 miles an hour, and you'd go, "Hey, rookie of the year, let's go 60 anyway. Pick up the pace. What are we doing?" But it was Larry Rice, Chuck Gurney, myself. Mark Alderson lived in the driveway in a motorhome, and Larry McCoy, who drove Indy cars, lived upstairs. It was. And then the bikers would show up, the AMA guys, Palmgren, Romero, and Aldana, and they'd sleep on the floor. I mean, it was the YMCA for racing. You have no idea who was going to be there.
The first time I worked, well, no, I take that back. Not the first time I worked with him. I'd worked with him for a couple of years. Larry Rice, I'm talking about on TV, and we did the Chili Bowl in 08. And I am used to working with a docile. I worked with him a lot in short course off road. That's where he was. And we did a little bit of other stuff as well that he wasn't really familiar with. I mean, he knew short course, but some of the other stuff that we'd been doing, he just took the job, and he did as good as he could do. He'd never driven one. So we're doing the Chili Bowl. We have 08 Chili Bowl coming up, HBO pay-per-view. It was myself, and it was Larry.
It was a four-man booth, if you will. It was you, Larry Rice, Pat Sullivan, and Dave Argerbright all on the stage, and then
and
myself and Matt Yoakum in the pits.
Dave Argerbright was supposed to be my right-hand man. Like I was host. I was a traffic director, if you will, and I needed to go right to Argerbright with almost everything. And then I had Larry on my right, and then Pat was down the other end of the desk. Well, as it turns out, once they said we're on and we go live and the guys start racing, well, Argerbright is a soft-spoken, his delivery is just a little softer, a little smoother, a little slower. Great guy, does an awesome job. But all of a sudden, holy sh! Larry Rice shows up. And I mean, dude, he was on the gas. I'm like, who is this guy? I've worked with you for 2 or 3 years, but now we were talking about midgets. And he knew midgets. And he got excited, man. And we were at the Chili Bowl, and he was just wound tight. And it ended up being myself and him all night long, bantering back. And, of course, the other two guys had great stuff to fill in. But Larry Rice just was absolutely on fire. And I was like, holy smokes, that's why they have this guy doing TV. I mean, he was in.
When he did Thursday Night Thunder, we would sit around going, who is this? This is, Rice would have a couple beers and fall asleep in his chair with a smile on his face at night before he got married. I mean, he was docile, was a really good, the most calm guy, and never raised his voice. Well, except when Mark Alderson tried to turn his basement into a speed shop. He got mad about that. But that was all. Bless his heart.
Well, I just think a lot of people, I mean, obviously you're many, many years of journalism now currently covering IndyCar. For those that are not familiar with what Robin does today, he actually does cover IndyCar. They still have you on pit road. You've been the best bobber and weaver in the industry, I think, of anybody. No matter how many times it looks like you're going to be out, you end up back in. It's been amazing, but you do a phenomenal job, and I think everybody loves it because what you've always done is brought the truth. and you never really cared about who you pissed off.
He was not politically correct.
No,
He
he
thought
was
it was
not.
cool.
And you know what? The show that was made for me, I mean, RPM Tonight, I worked at ESPN for about 6 years, and RPM Tonight was great because they gave me Wednesday for USAC and CART at that time, and it was cool. But when I got to work for Speed and Dave Despain, I got to be on Wind Tunnel and co-host it with him like 30 times. That was the greatest racing show because it covered the spectrum of racing, everybody, motorcycles, off-road, stock cars, midgets, sprints, dragsters. But there was never any, only once they said, quit making fun of NASCAR, okay? We got a lot of NASCAR fans, so get off of the NASCAR's ass. But no one ever said you can't say this or you can't do this. And it was, and Dave Despain, he's the best ever.
Yeah.
You talk about a guy that doesn't need it. You know, you guys have all done it. He doesn't need a teleprompter, and you can't tell when he's reading off a teleprompter. He's that good. Yeah. Because one night I hosted it, James Hinchcliffe and I hosted, Dave was riding his motorcycle, and they had me host it. And Hinch is going to be, he'll end up working for NBC, and he'll be the best analyst you've ever seen. He was made for television. But we were doing the show, and I tried reading the teleprompter the first, before the first break, and the guy behind the camera says, man, just don't, it's awful. Don't read it, And after the second segment, they said,
do your
why
thing.
don't you let Hinchcliffe host the show? Let Hinchcliffe host the show, and you be the guest. Oh, that's nice. So Hinchcliffe, he always reminds me of that. But that was I just kept thinking, you guys have maybe the capability. Someday there's going to be a show like that again, I think, on weekly television. I don't know where, but there's an audience for it. We had a great audience at Wind Tunnel. Big time.
It was a great program.
And they made money. It made money, Rico.
So why did it go away? Why do you think?
When Fox bought everything, they shut it down. You should have seen the studio they built for it. It was awesome.
Was it like this?
This was pretty damn close. I mean, a little bigger than this. But think about all the people that went through there, and they had the NASCAR shows and stuff. And if they'd have just kept the show going, instead they spent millions of dollars, and they started their own sports show at night that nobody watched.
Nope.
That went away about 8 months later.
Yeah.
And Wind Tunnel and Speed Report would have been the two shows they could have just plugged in and done forever.
So you're talking about Hinchcliffe. I got an interesting story. So Hinchcliffe works out at a place called Pit Fit.
Right.
Jim Leo, right? So Jim's a good friend, and I know with my physique, it's hard to believe that I would work out there as well.
You look great. Your hair looks perfect.
Thank you. It does look good.
Your hair does look good.
It's about all I got going for me. But anyhow, so, the thing of it is, Hinchcliffe and all those guys would be in there working out, and the other pit crews and stuff. So I got to know all these guys pretty good, Dixon and all these guys. And when Hinchcliffe got hurt at the Speedway, I went to Ellen Saul, which is who we deal with through our suite and all that stuff. And I told her, I said, you guys need to do something for first responders. You guys need to have a day for first responders, and it needs to be about this, okay? Because at the end of the day, that guy saved his life.
They saved his life.
On the track. I mean, he saved his life in that car. He was gone. And I said, it gives me chills talking about it, but I said, they saved his life, and this kind of stuff happens every day out in the real world, not here at this track, but in the real world. I said, so you have this event, and you have, police, fire, EMS, and all these guys. I said, what do the fire companies like to do best? Well, they like to have a chili cook-off. I mean, give me a break. Either they're playing cards, working their schedule for their lawn mowing service, or they're fixing chili or something. So, my fireman friends, sorry. But, so have a day where they have a firehouse out there. So we've kind of got it going, and that kind of brings me into the next thing that we were talking about was Mr. Penske taking over. And I mean, I love it. Just don't tear down Turn 2 Sweets. That's our place.
It's the Bobby Unser and I were talking the other day. It's the best thing that's ever happened in our lifetime to racing because of what. I mean, I've talked to RP about 5 times in the last 3 weeks because I'll send him an email from a fan. Hey, I've been going to the race for 50 years. Please, I can't tell who's leading the race. They took away my little crawl. We need it. So Roger, man, he responds like 2 minutes later. it's at midnight every Sunday night. That's when I said, shouldn't you be going to bed about now? He goes, I'll get my 4 hours. I don't need to be in bed. He sleeps 4 hours a night. That's it.
I could see it.
But he's got so many ideas about what he's. And I'll tell you what, he'll find a third engine manufacturer. It'll be somebody big like Ford or Toyota. He'll find more money for the purse, and it'll be where it should be. And he'll help. I think he'll help the IndyCar purse as well, which are a joke. But he's so invigorated about this whole thing. It's like I was talking to Tim Cendrick there. He goes, he's an 82-year-old man. He's like a 12-year-old kid. He's so blown away that it's his, that he gets to shape it the way he wants to. And you know what? I gave Tony George a lot of grief in the IRL days, but I've been the first guy to say in the last 2 months, he's the one that went to Mark Miles and said, we need to offer this to Roger Penske. We got people bidding on it, but we got to make sure he gets a chance because he would be the guy I'd want. And good for Tony because I think it worked out to be perfect.
What do you get an 82-year-old millionaire that has everything?
That's billionaire.
No, I mean, and him get excited about it. I
Right.
mean, there's probably not many things on this planet that would excite him anymore. I mean, he's done it all.
And Robin, you know best. I mean, my understanding was he was more than upset after he let Michigan go, right? After it was over with.
Well, I think so, but he made so much money. I mean, he did.
Right.
He got rid of Fontana and Michigan and all at the perfect time. If
Right.
you look back at it,
Right.
But he's so because when this whole thing happened, you're thinking, he's 82 years old. He flies to Japan, Australia, New Zealand, England, all the time. He's on a plane all the time, and he's got 68,000 people working for him or something like that. He's not going to have time to run a racetrack, but the Speedway supersedes everything else because that's his whole life, and that's what he's built his business around. And so, yeah, I don't know. I never heard him say. I never heard him talk about the regrets that he had, but he made Michigan a first-class track, just like Fontana. Everybody had a parking place. The fans were taken care of. The suites were. I mean, it was. And I think what's going to happen here is there's not going to be more dirt parking out here at the Speedway. And he said to me the other day, he says, "You know how many restrooms they got in the Speedway?" I said, RP, I got no idea. He goes, 166. He says, you know how many of them need help? I said, 165. He said, close. So we're gonna have new restrooms, and you're gonna have. I think
Are they bringing the troughs back?
I was going to say there's plenty of room to stand in those 166. If you don't mind being arm to arm with your buddy there, that's
remember the old
so
trough?
You can play swords if you want. It's
the trough. Yeah, that was nice, wasn't it?
The trough.
oh my
Hey,
God.
you mind looking away here for about 3 minutes?
Yeah,
That's okay.
yeah. I'm good.
But Rico, it's the only thing in my 50 years of covering racing that I've not heard one person complain about. I've never heard such a positive reaction to something. It's like everybody.
Yeah.
This is great. God, this is going to be great,
Yeah.
Because I think people know how much it means to him.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I want the best thing for the track. I want the best. We bring people out there all year. We have 24/7 access. We go downtown to a dinner. It's on a summer night. We go out there and, watch the sunset or sit out there and just look at the place and just breathe it in.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot of people that are missing that need to get that back. And I got to tell you, it seems like after the 100th kind of moving forward, it seems like it's a lot different feel out there, which is, I'll give some credit to Tony and those guys. And listen, like I said about the Holman George family, man, this has been their life all their life.
Sure.
And at some point it's kind of like, I give, I mean, it's a lot.
It's still the most spectacular. I mean, we can sit here and pick it apart.
No, it's
but
the best
when you're
ever.
there on race day, I mean, I get goosebumps now.
Yeah.
But it's the most spectacular thing I've ever seen. I've had the pleasure of spotting for Andretti Autosport the past couple of years and being on top of turn one up there where the spotters are and looking down on all the opening ceremonies and seeing the massive amount of people walking around and everything that's going on. It's just awe-inspiring, and there's really no words to describe it. You have to be there. It has to be a bucket list item. You've got to get out there and see it and feel it. It's just absolutely incredible. And to what you said before, I've after the race is over, I've sat up there on that crow's nest and let everybody go away and
I
just
know.
sat there and
I know.
looked.
I know you usually call me to
I
pick
do.
your ass up
I'll
and
sit
take
up there
you
and
to your car.
smoke. I'll sit up there and smoke a cigar and just watch everybody because it's. How many times do you get to do this in a lifetime? It's just.
Yep.
It's just incredible.
You got one of the great seats of all times too. God, that's a great seat.
It's unbelievable.
That
And the flyover this last year, the best yet.
It's
Where
just-
that dude took 2 laps. Like,
what always
Missed
gets
it the first time.
what always gets me is they've been running these commercials, the Great American Race, and I'm like, give me a break.
yeah, right.
The Great American Race is in May,
Yeah.
and it ain't Charlotte. It's the Indianapolis 500. It always has been. It always will be. Yeah, Daytona's okay, but it doesn't even it's not a wouldn't make a zit on the Speedway's butt.
Right.
Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's an incredible, incredible day. What a happening it is every time. And to say that you've won that thing, I mean, I was tickled pink. We finished 7th. We started off 21st, finished 7th. I thought we'd won the thing. I mean, it's an amazing run.
But there's just different victories. I mean, Kyle Kaiser made the race last year and McLaren didn't. So that was a victory.
Right.
That was
Yeah.
like winning the race,
For sure.
you know.
Some big dogs in there that have not made the call. By the way, talking about Dave Despain being the best ever, and you bringing up Bill Simpson, I want to throw a quick shout out for the people that aren't aware of it. Bob Varsha's in some serious trouble here, and I know he has a GoFundMe page. So if you can take a moment, look that up. Bob Varsha needs our help.
I talked to
it's
Bobby
certainly one of the best of all
Talked
time.
to him a couple days ago, and he's a private person, like a lot of, but I think he was very reluctant to ask for any help. And Marshall Pruitt from Racer really
Yes.
pushed it and said,
Yes.
Bob, the bills my wife have are staggering. You need some help. And I think they've raised almost $75,000 already.
I think is it pancreatic
Right there.
yeah,
cancer? Yeah.
prostate. Yeah,
Prostate.
But
Prostate.
but he's going to Duke, and he's got some pretty good people. The Duke's got a really good reputation in this area. So 74,000. That's
Yeah.
cool.
A brilliant guy. One of the first guys, when I first got in this industry, I picked up the phone and called him, and he answered the phone, talked to me as if he had known me for 15 years, took the time to help me out, get me going. Just an outstanding individual.
Yep.
He called a drag race. I think it was him and Ted Jones called a drag race with no video. I don't know how long they did it, but they did it for like a round or 2 rounds. There was technical difficulties, if you will, and they could still hear. So they could hear the cars do the burnout, and they would know to talk, and they had an approximate amount of time before they would line up, and then they'd hear them blast down the track, and they would talk again. But they had no video for I don't know how long and continued to call the race.
Yeah, drag racing's kind of visual.
Yeah, well, I think all racing's kind of visual.
You got to know when they're rolling into the lines there, you know?
Well, there has been on occasion where Stout and I are doing a voiceover, and the screen will go dark. We'll still hear it, but the screen will go dark, and we just keep going as if we could see everything, and we're waiting for the producer or engineer to go. Can you guys see what's going on? And we just keep going, thinking it's going to come back. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. We just keep talking, thinking we're pretty close to what's going on the racetrack.
Yeah.
Before we wrap this deal up with Miller here, you brought something up here when we were off camera. Some of the best stuff, of course, always happens when you're off camera.
Yeah,
but
you guys need to have a highlight show of
a
the
camera
outtakes.
running all the time.
The
As soon as you walk in the room, right? It's rolling.
Just not like the one that Bobby Knight had when he had his golf show. Did you ever see the outtakes on that?
Sam Carmichael's a treasure. Sam, I can't hit this ball out of the sand. Don't tell me to stand closer to this. That was some of the best television ever.
He was going ballistic.
Yep.
I mean,
But you had brought up people flying, the racers flying,
Yep.
and you jumped right in and said AJ Foyt learned how to fly his own plane, and a couple of other guys that couldn't read the manual. How's that work?
Was it United that said fly the friendly skies? They weren't friendly in the 60s because you had Hurtubise, Parnelli, Foyt, McCluskey, Uncle Bobby, Ruby. Now, I don't know that I think McCluskey might have been the only one of the 6 that actually passed his written test. The rest of them either didn't take it or didn't pass it.
Was it a written test for flying?
Yes.
Okay, just
For
checking.
flying. Sorry. A written test for flying. So one day, I'm at the Star, and Hurtubise calls me up, and he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Not much, Turkey. Want to go to Cleveland with me and get some parts?" I said, "Yes." So I go out, and he had a CB. He had an old CB plane, amphibious. And Prince, his dog, is sitting as the co-pilot, and We push it. We have to push it out of this little hangar, and Herc fires it up, and there's a little blue smoke coming out of the engine. You're thinking, well, it's okay. If I die, it doesn't matter. It's Jim Hurtubise. I won't be part of the headline, but I'll die with my hero. It's okay. So we take off. His radio doesn't work, and we're flying along, and about 5,000 feet, and he pulls it down to about 2,500. What's that sign say? I said, Newcastle. Okay. So we flew to Cleveland on the interstate. I mean, you know, you hear all these horror stories that, you know, my buddy Tony Bentonhausen got killed in a plane crash, and Alan Kowicki, and Graham Hill, and all the racing people that have lost their lives. And Tony Bentonhausen was as meticulous a pilot as I've ever, you know, he wasn't a daredevil. And yet here in the 60s were these crazy guys that no roll cage, no fuel cell, not much of a helmet. They were pretty brave to start with. So flying an airplane, it was like, you know, what's the big deal? I mean, you pull up and the thing goes up and you come, you know, I mean, self-taught pilots.
Yeah.
As Uncle Bobby
Yeah.
says, I'm a self-taught engineer, honey. Well, that could be, but
He told me, he said, I won Pikes Peak that year, and he said, I paid all my bills, and I had $3,000 left over. He goes, and I went and bought an airplane. I said, oh, wow, cool. So you became a pilot. He goes, oh, no, I never went and got my license. I just started flying. I was like, holy shit, what do you mean you just started flying? He goes, oh, yeah. He goes, in this plane, he goes, you'd have to put oil in it and get in the plane and take off quick because the oil would start draining out of it because it'd start flowing backwards until you got it up level and it wouldn't go out of it. I'm like, well, that sounds pretty dangerous. He goes, oh no. He said, I was racing out at Ascot for Ag, you know, Agajanian. He goes, I was racing out there for him. He goes, it's either a 17-hour drive from Albuquerque or it was a 7-hour flight with one stop. He goes, so I was doing great. I got $300 to show up there. It was like $300 to risk your life. It's like,
he landed once, Rico, in Albuquerque, and it was like a 90-mile-an-hour crosswind or something like that. Ronnie Doss, who was at lunch today, and it was Howard Milliken's son, and was helped Buddy Lazar win the Indy 500 in 96. Ronnie's a smart guy, and I think he might have been with him on this trip when he was like 14 or 15. But Uncle Bobby kind of misjudged the interstate and the electric guy wires and the hangar. And, you know, Mad World where the guy goes under the hangar. Yeah. I think Unser did that.
Barnstorming.
Bounced once and then came back out of the... The fact that Unser is still alive, and any of those guys are... Parnelli said one day, you know, he said racing was pretty dangerous back then. He says, but so was daily life with the Unsers. I mean, just trying to...
I heard they drove the streetcars like a race car. Anytime you got in a car with them, it was wide open. You
couldn't... In the mid-'60s, Hertz and Avis were the only two rent-a-car companies in the United States. In North America, neither one of the Unsers were allowed to rent a car because they destroyed so many cars. We go to Mossport once. Mossport's got this blind right-hander. So Bobby Unser talks Jerry Grant into renting a car for him in Jerry Grant's name. God rest his soul. Jerry Grant was a wonderful guy, and they were teammates.
One and done. You learn your lesson
so
there, right?
They go to the racetrack. And Unser takes the keys to Jerry Grant's cars and throws them 100 yards away and jumps in his car and takes off. So Jerry Grant wants to, you know, he jumps in the car and takes off after Bobby and Al Unser. They go around the right-hander, stop the car in the middle of the track sideways, and they both run over to the side. Jerry Grant comes over, the blind right-hander, pile drives, should have killed him. I mean, you know, they didn't think about that. Broke the car in half, steam pouring out of the radiators, and they're laying on the ground laughing, and Grant's like, I can't. So not only is that bad enough, then they decide one of the cars was still salvageable, so they get another rent-a-car, and they told Jerry, listen, we'll pay for it, don't worry about that, but let's take this down, we'll tell them the other one was stolen, but we can get this one back, the wheels are still moving, you know, we get the front end bowed in. So Mossport's up on a mountain, and so Grant gets in the car, and the Unsers are pushing him down this hill, and they're going 30, 40, 50, and he finally leaves the road, goes down an embankment, and thankfully there's a bunch of trees that stopped him.
Yeah, thankfully.
They almost killed him twice in an hour, and Grant said, I had nobody to blame but myself, and I'm like, no, how could you be that stupid? You can't let the because he said he looked back in the rearview mirror and they're laughing as they're going faster and faster, and he's trying to keep this thing on the road. But if you guys ever get to listen to Dinner with Racers, those two crazy guys that do that Dinner with Racers, I put them together with Unser, and it was a 3-hour thing, and they had to edit it. They've never edited anything, and they said they've never laughed that hard. I said, he's an American original. There ain't nobody like him. But you know, if you look at all those guys, fellas, they still never forgot where they came from, and they still know how to treat people. And fans feel like that, you know, I mean, Mario looks you in the face if you're a fan and shakes your hand and signs your autograph, and Rutherford. And you know, AJ's not always the most amenable, but he has his moments when he's, you know, I don't want to go out there and sign. I said, AJ, these people have been out here for a half an hour. It's 85 degrees in the sun. Go sign it. You know, they're your fans.
Yeah.
So it was a good era. I used to tell Bob Harkey, he used to bitch because he never got to drive for Penske or Foyt. I said, Harkey, you made the Indy 500 when it mattered. There were 65 cars going for 33 spots. You lived in a great era. And I think Rutherford and Uncle Bobby and Foyt, I think they all appreciate the era they were in and the era they thrived in.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Skinny. Be sure to check out all the latest sun and optical eyewear at fatheads.com. Special thanks to our sponsorship partners at Elliott's Custom Trailers and Carts. This has been a production of Fathead Studios. Please remember to subscribe.